I discovered the construction crew on my property at 6:30 in the morning when I was halfway through my first cup of coffee on the back porch of my house in Prescott, Arizona. The sound of heavy machinery had pulled me from my kitchen, and now I stood there in my bathrobe, watching a small excavator tear into the southwest corner of my 5-acre lot. 3 trucks were parked along what I thought was my fence line, and at least 8 workers in hard hats were moving around with purpose, like they had every right to be there. My name is Webb, and I had bought this property 2 years ago specifically because it was outside the Pinewood Heights subdivision, or so I thought. The real estate agent had been very clear that my land was not part of the HOA, which was exactly what I wanted after spending 10 miserable years in a neighborhood where the HOA president once fined me $200 for having the wrong shade of beige on my mailbox. This property was my escape, my sanctuary, and now someone was digging it up. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and walked across my yard in my slippers, dewdrops soaking through the fabric. As I got closer, I could see they were digging a massive hole, maybe 20 feet across and already 6 feet deep. Metal pipes were stacked nearby, along with what looked like large concrete tanks on flatbed trailers. "Hey!" I shouted over the noise of the excavator. "What the hell is going on here?" A man in a yellow hard hat turned to look at me, then consulted a clipboard. "Are you with the HOA?" "No, I'm the guy who owns this land. What are you doing?" He frowned and flipped through some papers. "This is 1247 Juniper Extension Road, right? We're contracted to build a water treatment facility for Pinewood Heights HOA, got the permits and everything." "This is 1247 Juniper Extension, but it's my property. Private property, not HOA." The foreman, whose name tag reads Steve, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I just work off the permits and plans we're given. Says right here this is HOA property, approved by the county and everything. You'll need to take it up with whoever hired us." "And who hired you?" "Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. Lady named Deborah Pemberton signed all the contracts. Of course it was a Deborah, I should have known. Stop the work, right now." "Until this gets sorted out." Steve shook his head. "Can't do that, sir. We've got a schedule and a contract. If you have a dispute, you need to resolve it with the HOA or through the county." "I'm just doing my job." I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office, but the deputy who answered told me it was a civil matter unless I could prove the permits were fraudulent. Since the foreman had shown me what looked like legitimate permits with county stamps, I was stuck. The deputy suggested I contact a lawyer and the county planning office. By the time I got dressed and drove to the county offices in downtown Prescott, I was furious. The woman at the planning desk pulled up the permit records and turned her monitor toward me. Sure enough, there was an approved permit for a water treatment facility at my address, filed by Pinewood Heights HOA with all the proper signatures and engineering reports. "This is my property," I said, showing her my deed. "How can they get a permit to build on my land?" She examined my deed, then looked at the permit application more carefully. "According to the survey attached to their permit, this parcel is listed as HOA common area. See, right here on the plat map." I looked at where she was pointing. Someone had redrawn the property lines on the survey map, extending the HOA's common area to include the corner of my lot where they were building. That's not accurate. My survey from when I bought the place shows that's my land. Do you have that survey with you? I didn't, of course. It was in a filing cabinet at home somewhere. I can bring it in. Please do. In the meantime, if there's a discrepancy in the property surveys, you'll need to file a formal dispute. That can take several weeks to resolve. Several weeks. They're building on my land right now. She gave me a sympathetic look that I had seen too many times in government offices. I understand your frustration, sir, but until we can verify the correct property boundaries, their permit is valid based on the survey they submitted. I spent the next 4 hours tracking down my property survey, making copies, and returning to the county office. By then, the original clerk had gone to lunch, and I had to explain everything again to someone new. This clerk accepted my survey and said she would forward it to the planning director, but it would take at least 3 to 5 business days for a review. When I got back home around 2 in the afternoon, the hole was now 15 feet deep, and they had started installing large concrete tanks. I recognized them from my years working in construction before I retired. They were settling tanks for a water treatment system. The HOA was building a full-scale water treatment plant on my property. I called my lawyer, a guy named Richard Chen who had handled my property purchase. He listened to my story and sighed. "Marcus, this is going to be complicated. If they filed fraudulent surveys, that's illegal, but proving it and getting them to stop construction while it's sorted out will require an emergency injunction. That means going before a judge, probably not until Monday." It was Thursday, so they just get to keep building, unless you want to physically stop them, which I strongly advise against. That would make you liable. We need to do this by the book. I spent the rest of Thursday and all day Friday watching the construction crew work. They were fast and efficient. By Friday evening, they had installed 3 large settling tanks, a filtration building, and were running pipes toward the main subdivision. The whole operation was clearly expensive and professionally done. On Monday morning, Richard and I appeared before Judge Patricia Morrison in Yavapai County Superior Court. We presented my survey and requested an emergency injunction to halt construction. The HOA's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Blackwell, argued that the construction was nearly complete and stopping it now would waste hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "the HOA conducted due diligence before beginning this project. We had a licensed surveyor verify the property boundaries and the county approved our permits. If Mr. Webb believes there is an error, that's unfortunate, but it shouldn't halt a critical infrastructure project that serves 300 families." Judge Morrison reviewed both surveys for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. "These surveys are contradictory, Mr. Webb's survey from 2 years ago shows clear ownership of the disputed parcel. The HOA's survey from 3 months ago shows it as common area. I'm ordering an independent survey by a court-appointed surveyor to resolve this discrepancy. In the meantime, construction may continue, but the HOA is on notice that they proceed at their own risk." "Your Honor," I said, standing up despite Richard trying to stop me, "they're building a water treatment plant on my land. By the time we get an independent survey, it'll be operational." "Mr. Webb, I understand your concern, but without clear evidence that the permit is fraudulent, I cannot halt a project that's this far along. However, I am expediting the survey. We'll have results within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I walked out of the courthouse feeling defeated. Richard put a hand on my shoulder. "This is actually good." The judge acknowledged the discrepancy and ordered an independent survey. When it confirms your property lines, they'll have to remove everything and pay damages. And in the meantime, document everything. Take photos, keep records. It'll help with damages. The water treatment plant became operational on a Wednesday morning, exactly 9 days after I first discovered them digging. I watched from my porch as workers in different uniforms, utility company people, connected the output pipes to the subdivision's main water line. A woman in a business suit arrived in a BMW and spent 20 minutes inspecting everything with what appeared to be HOA board members. I walked over, camera in hand, taking photos of everything. The woman in the suit turned to look at me with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. She was probably in her early 50s, with blonde hair in that specific suburban cut that screamed HOA board president. "Can I help you?" she asked coldly. You can start by getting your water plant off my property. I'm Marcus Webb. This is my land. I'm Deborah Pemberton, president of Pinewood Heights HOA. And according to our survey and county permits, this is HOA common area. If you have a dispute, please direct it to our attorney. I've already been to court. There's an independent survey being done right now. Deborah's smile tightened. Well, until that survey proves otherwise, this facility is legal and operational. We've invested $450,000 in this treatment plant to provide clean water to our community. I suggest you stop harassing our workers and contractors. I'm not harassing anyone. I'm documenting the unauthorized construction on my property. It's not your property, she said, her voice rising slightly. And if you continue to trespass on HOA common area and interfere with our facility, we will seek a restraining order. I laughed, which clearly made her angrier. You're going to get a restraining order to keep me off my own land. It's not your land. She was almost shouting now, her face flushing red. Two of the board members behind her looked uncomfortable. This has been verified by a licensed surveyor and approved by the county. You're just a bitter man who doesn't want to follow the rules. I'm not part of your HOA. That's where you're wrong. The county records show this parcel was always part of the original development plan. Your real estate agent made a mistake. You've been part of Pinewood Heights HOA the entire time. That was new information, and it was definitely wrong. I have a deed that explicitly states I'm not part of the HOA. Deborah waved her hand dismissively. Deeds can be wrong. The master plan for this development is what matters, and now, if you'll excuse me, we have a facility to bring online. I watched them work for another hour, then went home and called Richard. He was already looking into Deborah's claim about the master development plan. Marcus, I'm pulling the original subdivision plat from when Pinewood Heights was developed. That was back in 1998. If your parcel was part of it, there will be a record. The independent surveyor showed up 3 days later, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Gonzalez who spent 6 hours on the property with her equipment. She barely spoke to me except to ask when I had purchased the land and whether I had the original survey markers. I showed her where they were, half buried in the dirt but still visible. While she worked, I noticed that the water treatment plant was running at full capacity. Water flowed through the pipes into the subdivision, and I could hear the hum of electric pumps and filtration systems. The HOA had built a functioning utility on what I was certain was my property, and they were using it like they owned the place. That's when the idea hit me. If the independent survey proved this was my land, then the HOA had built a water treatment facility on my property without permission. They were operating a utility on private land. And utilities on private land generally required easements, which required compensation. Or, in the absence of an easement, they were essentially renting my land without a lease. I started doing research. Arizona water law is complicated, but one thing was clear. Water utilities are heavily regulated, and unauthorized use of private property to operate a utility is a serious matter. I found cases where property owners had successfully sued for compensation when utilities used their land without proper easement agreements. But I also found something more interesting. If someone operates a utility on your property without permission, and you allow it to continue while knowing about it, you can potentially claim that they're leasing your land. And you can set the lease terms retroactively once the property dispute is resolved. The more I thought about it, the more the plan took shape. If I stopped them now, they'd just have to remove the plant, and I'd get some damages. But if I let them keep operating it while the legal case worked through the system, and then proved the land was mine, I could claim they owed me lease payments for the entire time they used my property. Not just lease payments, usage fees. I spent the weekend researching water utility rates, commercial property lease rates in Prescott, and the legal framework for unauthorized use of property. By Monday, I had the outline of a plan that made me smile for the first time since this whole mess started. Richard called me Tuesday morning. Good news. I found the original 1998 subdivision plat. Your parcel is not on it. It was part of a separate larger parcel that wasn't subdivided until 2015, and even then, it was specifically excluded from the HOA. Your deed is correct. You're not part of Pinewood Heights HOA, and that corner of your property is definitely yours. So the survey they submitted was fraudulent, either fraudulent or incompetent. Either way, they built on your land without permission. Good, don't tell them yet. Richard paused. What? Let them keep operating. I want detailed records of exactly how much water they're treating and pumping through that facility. Can you get that information through Discovery? Marcus, what are you planning? I explained my idea. Richard was quiet for a long moment. That's brilliant and possibly insane. You want to let them continue operating a water treatment plant on your land so you can charge them for it. They built it without permission. They're using my land without permission. Why shouldn't I charge them? Because they'll just remove it once the survey proves you own the land. Let them try. That plant is operational and serving 300 families. You think the county is going to let them shut it down without a replacement water source? They'll have to keep operating it while they figure out what to do. And every day they operate it, they're using my land and my property. Richard actually laughed. You're going to bill the HOA for water treatment on your own land. This is either going to work brilliantly or blow up in your face. I'm willing to risk it. The independent survey results came back 8 days later, exactly as expected. Patricia Gonzalez had confirmed my property lines, and the water treatment facility was entirely on my land, approximately 30 feet past the actual property boundary. Judge Morrison scheduled a hearing for the following week. During that week, I had a private surveyor come out and mark the exact property lines with bright orange stakes and flags. I put up trail cameras to document the HOA's use of the facility. And I started keeping detailed logs of every time I saw workers at the plant, every truck that came and went, and every sound of running water that came from the filtration system. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Judge Morrison had both surveys in front of her, along with the original subdivision plat that Richard had obtained. Deborah Pemberton sat on the other side of the courtroom with Victoria Blackwell, her lawyer. Deborah kept glaring at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. Judge Morrison didn't waste time. I've reviewed the independent survey conducted by Patricia Gonzalez as well as the historical records of this property. The findings are clear. The parcel in question, including the area where the water treatment facility was constructed, belongs to Marcus Webb. It is not HOA common area and never has been. The survey submitted by Pinewood Heights HOA was either erroneous or fraudulent. Victoria Blackwell stood immediately. Your Honor, the HOA acted in good faith based on a survey conducted by a licensed professional. We had no reason to believe the property boundaries were incorrect. Good faith doesn't override property rights, Counselor. Mr. Webb has been clear from the beginning that this was his land. The HOA proceeded with construction despite his objections. We had a valid permit, Victoria argued. Based on an incorrect survey, the permit is invalid. Judge Morrison looked at some papers. I'm ordering the HOA to cease all operations of the water treatment facility immediately and to remove it from Mr. Webb's property within 60 days. Your Honor, I said, standing up. I'd like to propose an alternative. Everyone looked at me. Richard had a slight smile on his face. He knew what was coming. I'm willing to allow the HOA to continue operating the facility on my land under a lease agreement with appropriate compensation. Deborah actually gasped. Compensation? You want us to pay you? Judge Morrison held up her hand. Mr. Webb, what kind of compensation are you proposing? Well, Your Honor, commercial property lease rates in this area run about $1,500 per acre per year. The facility occupies approximately 1/4 acre of my land, so a lease would be around $400 per year, which seems reasonable. Victoria was writing notes furiously. Deborah looked like she wanted to explode. However, I continued, there's also the matter of the utility usage itself. The HOA is operating a water treatment facility that processes, according to the facility specifications I obtained, approximately 50,000 gallons per day. That's water flowing through equipment on my property, using my land as a base of operations. I believe a usage fee is appropriate. How much? Judge Morrison asked, and I could see she was intrigued. Industrial water treatment facilities typically charge between $3 and $8 per 1,000 gallons for treatment services. Given that this facility is on my property without my permission, I think $5 per 1,000 gallons is fair. That's 50,000 gallons per day, so $250 per day in usage fees. Deborah jumped up. That's outrageous. That's over $90,000 a year. That's the cost of building a water treatment plant on someone else's property without permission, I said calmly. Judge Morrison looked at both lawyers. Mr. Webb is the property owner. He has the right to set the terms for use of his property. Miss Blackwell, does the HOA have an alternative water source? Victoria looked miserable. No, Your Honor. This facility is currently supplying water to the entire subdivision. Shutting it down would leave 300 families without treated water. Then I suggest the HOA negotiate a lease agreement with Mr. Webb. In the meantime, I'm granting Mr. Webb's request to allow continued operation under the terms he specified, retroactive to the date the facility became operational, pending a formal lease agreement between the parties. Your Honor, that's 18 days of operation, Victoria protested. That's over $4,000 in retroactive fees plus the lease amount. That's the consequence of building on someone else's land, Judge Morrison said firmly. The HOA has 60 days to either negotiate a long-term agreement with Mr. Webb or find an alternative location and water source. This hearing is adjourned. I left the courthouse feeling better than I had in weeks. Richard was grinning. You just turned the HOA's biggest project into your personal revenue stream. They shouldn't have built it on my land. They're going to fight this. Let them. Every day they fight is another day they pay me. Deborah caught up with me in the parking lot. Her face was red and she was shaking with anger. You can't do this. This is extortion. It's a lease agreement for use of my property, approved by a judge. We'll appeal, we'll take this to a higher court. That'll take months, maybe years. And every single day the meter is running, 50,000 gallons a day at $5 per 1,000 gallons. You do the math. We'll shut down the facility. Then 300 families have no water, and the county will probably fine you for failing to provide basic utilities. Your choice. She stood there sputtering, unable to form words. Finally, she said, "You're a horrible person. I'm a property owner who wants to be compensated for the unauthorized use of my land. If that makes me horrible, I can live with it." Over the next 2 weeks, I received daily complaints from the HOA board. First, they sent letters claiming my rates were unreasonable and demanding arbitration. Then they had their lawyer send threatening letters about potential lawsuits. Then Deborah herself showed up at my door 3 times, each time more desperate than the last. "Please," she said on the 3rd visit, her voice strained. "The board is in crisis. We can't afford these rates. We'll go bankrupt. You should have thought about that before building on my land. We made a mistake. Our surveyor made a mistake. Then sue your surveyor, but the facility is still on my property and you're still using it. What do you want? What will it take for you to be reasonable? I had been thinking about this. I want a formal written apology from the HOA admitting that you built on my property without permission. I want that apology posted in the subdivision newsletter and on the HOA website. And I want the HOA to pay for a new fence along the actual property line installed where I specify. And in exchange, I'll reduce the usage fee to $2 per 1,000 gallons. That's 40% of what I'm charging now. Deborah looked at me with pure hatred. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying justice. You tried to steal my land and bully me with fake surveys and lawyers. Now you're paying for it, literally. She left without another word. The next day, Victoria Blackwell called Richard with a settlement proposal. The HOA would admit the construction was on my property, issue a formal apology, and pay for the fence I wanted. In exchange, I would reduce the usage fee to $2 per 1,000 gallons and sign a 10-year lease agreement at $400 per year for the land use. I countered with a 5-year lease with an option to renegotiate rates after 3 years. They accepted. The formal apology appeared in the Pinewood Heights HOA newsletter the following week. It was a small paragraph buried on page 3, but it was there in black and white. The Pinewood Heights HOA acknowledges that the water treatment facility constructed on Juniper Extension Road was built on property belonging to Marcus Webb due to a surveyor error. We apologize for this mistake and any inconvenience caused to Mr. Webb. They didn't mention the money they were now paying me, of course. The fence went up over the next month, a nice 6-foot privacy fence that clearly marked the property line. The HOA workers installing it looked miserable every time I walked out to check on their progress. I made sure to bring lemonade and offer it to them with a smile. It wasn't their fault their bosses had screwed up. The first lease payment and usage fees arrived by check in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. The check was for exactly $4,892.00, covering the 18 days of retroactive usage, the first month of ongoing usage, and the prorated lease payment. I took a photo of it before depositing it in my bank. Richard called that afternoon. Congratulations, you successfully monetized the HOA's mistake. It feels good, I admitted. But I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. What do you mean? Deborah Pemberton doesn't strike me as someone who accepts defeat. She's going to try something. I was right. 2 weeks later, I received a notice from the county zoning department. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was operating an unpermitted commercial enterprise on residential land. The letter stated that if I was charging fees for water treatment, I might be in violation of zoning laws and would need to apply for a commercial use permit. The complaint was anonymous, but I knew exactly who filed it. I called Richard immediately. Can they do this? Can they claim I'm operating a commercial business? It's a stretch, but they're trying. You're not actually treating the water or operating the facility. You're leasing land and charging a usage fee. That's not a commercial enterprise, that's a property lease. So what do I do? Respond to the county, explain the situation, I'll draft a letter. Richard's letter was a masterpiece. It explained the court ruling, the lease agreement, and made it clear that I was not operating any kind of business, merely charging rent for use of my property. The HOA was the one operating the water treatment facility. If anyone needed a commercial permit, it was them. The county zoning department dropped the complaint 2 weeks later, but they did send an inspector to verify that the HOA had proper permits for operating the facility. That inspection apparently revealed several minor violations that the HOA had to correct, which cost them additional money and time. Deborah left me a voicemail after that. I hope you're proud of yourself. Your petty revenge is costing our community thousands of dollars in repairs and upgrades that could have gone to park maintenance and community programs. I didn't call her back. Life settled into a new normal over the next few months. The first of every month, I received a check from Pinewood Heights HOA for the lease and usage fees. It averaged around $3,000 per month, depending on water usage. I deposited each check with satisfaction. I used some of the money to make improvements to my property. I built a new workshop, upgraded my solar panel system, and put in a nice patio. Every time I made an improvement, I thought about how the HOA's arrogance had paid for it. But Deborah wasn't done. 6 months into the lease agreement, I got a call from Richard. "We have a problem. The HOA is claiming that the water treatment facility has significantly decreased in value due to the lease payments, and they want to renegotiate the terms. We have a 5-year contract. They're threatening to shut down the facility and find an alternative water source. They claim it's economically unfeasible to continue operating under the current terms." Can they do that? Technically, yes. But it would be incredibly expensive and take at least a year to build a new facility on actual HOA land. In the meantime, they'd have to provide water to the subdivision somehow. Let them figure it out. We have a contract. Marcus, I think we should hear what they're proposing. If they shut down the facility, you lose the income. He had a point. Fine, set up a meeting. The meeting was held in a conference room at a local attorney's office. Deborah was there with Victoria Blackwell and 2 other HOA board members I hadn't met. I brought Richard. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria started with a presentation. The current lease and usage fees are costing the HOA approximately $36,000 per year. This is unsustainable. We've had to raise HOA dues twice to cover this expense, and our residents are complaining. We're proposing a buyout. A buyout? I asked. We want to purchase the portion of your property where the facility is located. We'll pay fair market value plus 20% as compensation for the disruption. I looked at Richard, who was already shaking his head. Not interested. "Mr. Webb, please be reasonable," Deborah said, her voice strained. "This has gone on long enough. We made a mistake, you've been compensated, now let's resolve this permanently. The resolution is the lease agreement we already have, which is bleeding us dry. That's not my problem. You built an expensive facility on my land without permission. You're lucky I'm letting you use it at all." One of the other board members, a man in his 60s named Robert, spoke up. "Mr. Webb, I understand you're angry about what happened, but there are 300 families in our subdivision who are caught in the middle of this. The increased HOA dues are hurting people on fixed incomes. Then maybe the HOA board should have done their due diligence before building a $450,000 facility on land they didn't own." "We did do due diligence," Deborah snapped. "Our surveyor made an error. It was an honest mistake." "Honest mistakes have consequences." Victoria tried a different approach. "What if we agreed to a lump sum payment to buy out the remaining lease? We'd pay you the full amount of the lease for 5 years upfront, and then we own the facility and the land." I did the math in my head. 5 years of usage fees and lease payments would be around $180,000. You want to pay me $180,000 for a 1/4 acre of land, for the land and to settle all claims related to the facility. It was tempting. That was a lot of money up front. But something about Deborah's eagerness made me suspicious. "I'll think about it." "We need an answer soon," Victoria said. "The board is meeting next week to discuss alternative water sources." After they left, Richard and I sat in the conference room. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think they're bluffing about the alternative water source. Building a new facility would cost at least $500,000 and take over a year. The buyout might actually be your best option for a guaranteed payout. But I don't trust Deborah Pemberton. She's been trying to get out of this agreement since day one. If she's offering a buyout, there's a reason beyond just saving money. What reason? I don't know yet. Let me do some research. Richard spent the next week digging into Pinewood Heights HOA's finances and recent activities. What he found was interesting. The HOA had recently applied for a county grant to upgrade community infrastructure. Part of that grant application included the water treatment facility, which they listed as an HOA asset. They're trying to get grant money for a facility they don't own, Richard explained. If they own the facility and the land outright, they can claim it as a community asset worth $450,000. That makes them eligible for larger infrastructure grants. So they want to buy my land not to save money, but to get more money from grants. Exactly. And here's the thing, those grants can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're playing the long game. Then so am I, no buyout. I called Victoria the next day and declined the buyout offer. She tried to negotiate, offering to increase the amount to $200,000, but I stood firm. The lease agreement would continue as written. Deborah's response came 2 days later in the form of a certified letter. The HOA was filing a lawsuit claiming that my usage fees constituted an illegal monopoly on water services and violated Arizona utility regulations. They were seeking to have the lease agreement voided and the fees refunded. "This is ridiculous," I told Richard when I showed him the letter. "I'm not providing water services, they are. I'm just renting land." "I know, but they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. We'll need to respond and probably go back to court." The lawsuit dragged on for 3 months. During that time, the HOA continued making the monthly payments as required by the court while the case was pending. They filed multiple motions claiming everything from unfair business practices to environmental concerns about having a water treatment facility on private residential land. Every motion was denied. Judge Morrison, who was still overseeing the case, seemed increasingly annoyed with the HOA's tactics. At one hearing, she actually said, "Miss Blackwell, your client built this facility on Mr. Webb's land without permission. The current lease agreement is more than generous given that Mr. Webb could have simply forced you to remove everything. I suggest the HOA accept the arrangement and move on." But Deborah wouldn't let it go. At one point, she showed up at my house with a different approach. She was alone, without lawyers or board members, and she looked exhausted. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just the two of us, no lawyers, no threats." I considered sending her away, but curiosity got the better of me. "Fine, you've got 10 minutes. We sat on my porch, the same porch where I had been drinking coffee the morning I discovered the construction. Deborah looked out at my property and sighed. "I hate you," she said simply. "I want you to know that I hate what you've done to our community." "I didn't do anything to your community, you did. We made a mistake, a surveyor error, that's all. And you've turned it into this crusade to punish us. I'm charging rent for use of my property. That's not punishment, that's business. It's revenge. You hate HOAs and you're taking it out on us." She wasn't entirely wrong, but I wasn't going to admit it. "Why are you really here, Deborah?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to lose my position on the board. There's a vote of no confidence next month. The residents blame me for this mess for the increased dues for the legal fees. They want me out. And I need this resolved before that vote. If I can announce a settlement, something that makes the HOA look good, I might survive. You want me to help you save your position on the board after everything you've put me through. I'm asking you to consider a compromise, not for me, but for the community. There are families in that subdivision who are struggling to pay the increased dues. Retirees on fixed incomes, young families just starting out, they're the ones suffering because of this." It was a good speech, and part of me even believed she meant it. But I also knew Deborah well enough by now to know she was primarily motivated by self-interest. "Here's my compromise," I said. "The lease agreement stands as written for the full 5 years. No buyout, no renegotiation. But at the end of 5 years, if the HOA wants to purchase the land, I'll sell it to them at fair market value with no premium. That gives you 5 years to save up or secure grant money or whatever you need. That's not a compromise, that's just the current agreement with a maybe at the end. That's my offer." "Take it or leave it," she left it, and me. Without another word, she walked to her car and drove away. The vote of no confidence happened 3 weeks later. Deborah lost her position as HOA president by a margin of 68% to 32%. The new president was a younger woman named Jennifer Martinez, who had run on a platform of fiscal responsibility and transparency. Jennifer called me the day after she took office. "Mr. Webb, I'd like to meet with you if possible. I want to see if we can find a better path forward." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Prescott. Jennifer was in her late 30s, professional and direct. "I've reviewed the entire situation with our attorney," she said. "What happened to you was wrong. The previous board, particularly Deborah, handled this terribly from the start. I appreciate that. The current lease agreement is painful for the HOA financially, but I understand it's legal and enforceable. I'm not here to try to change it or fight it. I'm here to see if there's a way we can make this work better for everyone. I'm listening. The water treatment facility is actually a great asset for the subdivision. It provides better water quality than the county system, and in the long run, it will save money. The problem is the lease payments. They're manageable, but they're preventing us from doing other improvements the community needs. What are you proposing? Nothing right now. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to have ongoing conversations about this over the next few years. If circumstances change, if opportunities arise, I'd like to know we can talk about it." It was a reasonable request. I can agree to that. Thank you, and Mr. Webb, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about how you were treated. You had every right to be angry. Jennifer proved to be true to her word. She didn't harass me or threaten legal action. The monthly payments arrived on time every time. Occasionally, she would send me an email updating me on the facility's performance or asking if I had any concerns about the operation. It was almost pleasant. Life continued in this new equilibrium for another year. The water treatment facility hummed along on my property, providing clean water to 300 families. I received my monthly checks, which had grown to average around $3,200 as water usage increased slightly during the hot Arizona summers. I used the money well. I paid off my mortgage early, invested a significant amount, and still had plenty left over for projects around my property. The workshop I built turned into a small woodworking hobby that I sold pieces from occasionally. Life was good. Then everything changed on a Tuesday morning when the sheriff's department showed up at my door. Deputy Sarah Martinez, no relation to Jennifer from the HOA, was holding a warrant. "Mr. Webb, we need to inspect the water treatment facility on your property." "Why? What's going on?" "There's been a complaint filed with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. Someone claimed the facility is discharging contaminated water into the local groundwater supply." My stomach dropped. That's not possible. The facility is operated by the HOA and it's been inspected multiple times. Nevertheless, we have a warrant to inspect. We'll need access to the facility and to take water samples from various points on your property. I called Richard immediately while the environmental inspectors who had arrived with the deputy began their work. Someone's trying to frame me for environmental violations. They can't frame you. You don't operate the facility, but it's on my land. If there's contamination, I could be liable as the property owner. Richard arrived within an hour. By then, the inspectors had been working for 2 hours. taking samples from the facility's outflow from my well and from several points around my property. The lead inspector, a stern man named Douglas Chen, wouldn't tell me anything about what they were finding. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, Douglas came to my porch where Richard and I were waiting. "Mr. Webb, we've found elevated levels of several contaminants in the outflow from the water treatment facility. Specifically, we're seeing higher than acceptable levels of chlorine byproducts and some heavy metals." "What does that mean?" "It means the facility isn't operating properly. These contaminants shouldn't be in the treated water at these levels. We're going to need to shut down the facility immediately until this is resolved." "I don't operate the facility. The HOA does." "The facility is on your property. You're the property owner of record. That makes you potentially liable." Richard jumped in. "Mr. Chen, my client has a lease agreement with the HOA. They operate and maintain the facility. Any operational issues are their responsibility, not his." Douglas consulted his notes. "Who performs the maintenance and testing on the facility?" "The HOA hires contractors," I said. "I don't have anything to do with the operation." "Do you have documentation of that?" I pulled out my phone and started looking through emails. Jennifer Martinez had been sending me monthly reports on the facility's operation, including maintenance schedules and water quality tests. I forwarded several months of reports to Douglas's email. He reviewed them on his phone, then nodded. "This helps, but we still need to shut down the facility until we determine the source of the contamination and verify it's resolved." "Shut it down." I said, "That's 300 families without water. That's 300 families drinking potentially contaminated water. The facility goes offline now." Douglas and his team physically locked out the facility's main pumps and put a county seal on the control building. Within an hour, angry calls were flooding the HOA office as residents realized their water had stopped flowing. Jennifer Martinez called me that evening. "Marcus, what's happening?" "The county just shut down our water facility." I explained about the inspection and the contamination findings. Jennifer was silent for a long moment. "We do monthly water quality tests." "There's never been any issues." "Do you have the test results?" "Yes, all of them. They're all within acceptable limits." "Then someone's lying or someone's test is wrong." Richard suggested we request an independent analysis. Jennifer agreed immediately, and we hired a private environmental testing firm to come out the next day. They took samples from the same locations the county had tested. The results came back 3 days later. The independent tests showed no contamination. The water was clean and well within all acceptable limits. Douglas Chen seemed surprised when we presented the independent test results. "That's not possible. Our tests clearly showed contamination." "Then either your tests were wrong or someone tampered with your samples," Richard said. That led to an internal investigation by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. What they found made me both furious and vindicated. Someone had accessed the county testing van the night before the inspection and contaminated the sample containers with diluted chlorine bleach and trace amounts of lead. The containers appeared sealed, so when the inspectors collected samples in them, the samples were automatically contaminated. Who had access to the van? I asked Douglas when he came to apologize and inform me the facility could reopen. It was parked in the county yard overnight. Several people could have accessed it, but we found evidence of the tampering on security cameras. We're working with law enforcement to identify the person responsible. The security camera footage was grainy, but it showed a figure approaching the van around 2 in the morning. The person was wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap, making identification difficult. But they had made one mistake. They had parked in a nearby lot, and the camera caught their license plate. The plate belonged to a car registered to Deborah Pemberton. When the sheriff's deputies arrested Deborah 3 days later, she denied everything. "That's not me on the camera. Someone stole my car." "Did you report your car stolen?" Deputy Martinez asked. "No, but someone could have taken it without me knowing. Your car was in your driveway the morning after the alleged theft." Deborah's lawyer eventually negotiated a deal. Deborah pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and filing a false environmental complaint. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the costs of the investigations and the independent testing. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The whole incident made local news. Former HOA president arrested for tampering with water quality tests ran in the Prescott Daily Courier. The story detailed the entire saga, from the unauthorized construction on my land to Deborah's attempt to frame me for environmental violations. Jennifer Martinez called me after Deborah's sentencing. "Marcus, I can't apologize enough for what Deborah did. The board had no idea she was planning something like this. I know this wasn't on you. I want to make this right. The board has voted to offer you a new proposal." We met at the coffee shop again. Jennifer had 3 other board members with her, including Robert, the older man who had been at the previous negotiation. They all looked embarrassed. "We want to purchase the land where the facility is located," Jennifer said. "Fair market value, no games, no tricks. We'll pay for a professional appraisal, and whatever that appraisal says, we'll pay. Plus, we'll add $50,000 as compensation for everything you've been through with Deborah." "What about the remaining lease period?" "We'll pay out the remaining lease payments in full, including estimated usage fees based on the past year's average. You'll get everything you would have gotten over the next 3.5 years, plus the land purchase price, plus the $50,000. I looked at Richard, who nodded slightly. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Jennifer said. "The HOA should have bought this land before building the facility. That was the right thing to do, and we're doing it now, even if it's years late. You've been more than patient with us, and honestly, the community just wants this resolved." The drama with Deborah made everyone realize how badly the previous board handled this situation. Robert spoke up. "Mr. Webb, I was on the board when Deborah pushed through the water facility project. I should have questioned the property survey more carefully. I should have insisted we verify everything before breaking ground. I didn't, and you suffered for it. I'm sorry." It was the most sincere apology I had received through this entire ordeal. "I appreciate that. Will you consider our offer?" Jennifer asked. "I'll consider it." The appraisal came in at $48,000 for the quarter-acre where the facility was located. The remaining lease payments and usage fees totaled approximately $112,000. With the additional $50,000 in compensation, the total offer was $210,000. Richard and I discussed it over lunch. "It's a good offer," he said. "More than fair, actually. You've already received about $60,000 over the past year and a half. This would bring your total compensation to around $270,000. For a piece of land I wasn't even using. For a piece of land the HOA stole from you and then had to pay to get back. You've done well here, Marcus." I accepted the offer the next day. The closing took 3 weeks, and when I walked out of the title company with a check for $210,000, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The story could have ended there, but there was one more chapter. 3 months after the sale, I received an invitation to the Pinewood Heights HOA annual community picnic. Jennifer had written a personal note. "We'd love to have you join us. You're part of this community's story, and we'd like to thank you properly." I almost didn't go. The idea of voluntarily attending an HOA event seemed insane after everything I had been through. But curiosity got the better of me. The picnic was held in the subdivision's community park on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. There were probably 200 people there, families with kids, older couples, young professionals. Jennifer spotted me as soon as I arrived and came over with a huge smile. "You came, I wasn't sure you would." I wasn't sure either. She led me to a pavilion where several board members were waiting. Robert was there, along with a few others I recognized. Jennifer asked for everyone's attention, and the crowd gradually quieted down. "Many of you know the story of the water treatment facility and the problems we had with the previous board," Jennifer said. "What you might not know is that Marcus Webb, who's here with us today, had every right to make our lives miserable. He could have shut down the facility immediately, leaving us without water. He could have charged us much more than he did. Instead, he worked with us even when we didn't deserve it." There was some applause. I felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. "The facility that provides our clean water exists because Marcus was willing to negotiate and work with the new board. So on behalf of the entire Pinewood Heights community, thank you." She handed me a plaque. It read, "Presented to Marcus Webb in recognition of his patience, integrity, and commitment to doing what's right. Thank you for helping our community. Pinewood Heights HOA 2025. I was genuinely surprised. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come to future picnics," Jennifer said with a smile. "You're always welcome here." I stayed at the picnic for 2 hours, meeting residents and hearing stories about the subdivision. Several people thanked me personally for not shutting down the water facility immediately when I had the chance. One older woman told me the water quality from the facility had helped with her health issues. It was strange being thanked for something that had started as pure revenge. But maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes revenge turns into justice, and justice turns into something better than either party expected. As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about the entire journey. From that first morning when I discovered the construction crew, through the legal battles, Deborah's arrest, and finally the settlement, it had been almost 2 years of my life consumed by this conflict. But I had won, not just financially, though the money was significant. I had won by standing my ground, by refusing to be bullied by an HOA that thought they could do whatever they wanted, and by turning their mistake into my advantage. The water treatment plant still hummed on what was now HOA property, providing clean water to 300 families. Every time I drove past the subdivision entrance, I could see the facility in the distance. It was a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's making sure the person who wronged you has to pay for their mistake, literally, while you profit from their arrogance. I used the money wisely. Half went into investments and retirement accounts. A quarter went to home improvements and buying some new equipment for my workshop. The last quarter I donated to a legal aid organization that helps property owners fight HOA overreach. Because if there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that HOAs will keep abusing their power until someone stands up to them. I had the resources and stubbornness to fight back. Not everyone does. 6 months after the settlement, I received a letter from a man in Tucson. He had read about my case in the news and was dealing with his own HOA nightmare. They were trying to force him to remove solar panels that were supposedly against community guidelines, even though he had installed them before the guidelines were written. I connected him with Richard and provided some advice based on my experience. Last I heard, he won his case and the HOA had to change their guidelines. That happened a few more times over the following year. People would reach out, usually through Richard's office, asking for advice or just wanting to know if it was possible to fight an HOA and win. I helped when I could, sharing what I had learned. In a way, Deborah Pemberton and the Pinewood Heights HOA had done me a favor. They had tried to steal my land and bully me into submission. Instead, they had given me a purpose, and proven that standing up to institutional arrogance was not only possible but profitable. I still live on my property in Prescott, still enjoying the 5 acres that I rightfully own. Every month, I don't receive a check from the HOA anymore, but I don't miss it. The lump sum was more than fair, and the peace of having the matter completely resolved is worth more than any ongoing payment stream. Jennifer Martinez and I became friendly acquaintances. We get coffee every few months, and she updates me on the subdivision. The water facility is running smoothly, the HOA's finances have stabilized, and the community is thriving. She's a good president, the kind of leader the HOA should have had from the beginning. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that construction crew had never appeared on my property that morning. Would I still be living my quiet retirement, working on woodworking projects and enjoying the Arizona sunshine? Probably. But I also wouldn't have the satisfaction of knowing I stood up for myself and won. I wouldn't have the money that's now securing my retirement and helping others fight similar battles. And I wouldn't have the story that, according to Richard, has become somewhat legendary in Arizona property law circles. "You're the guy who made the HOA pay him for their own water plant," Richard told me at lunch one day. "I've had 3 different lawyers bring up your case in other HOA disputes. You've become a precedent." That made me smile. A precedent, proof that property owners don't have to roll over when an HOA decides to abuse its power. The final irony came about a year after the settlement. Jennifer called me with an unusual request. "Marcus, the HOA is considering purchasing a small parcel of land adjacent to the subdivision to expand our park area. The property owner is being difficult, demanding way more than the land is worth. Would you be willing to talk to him? Give him some perspective on working with the HOA?" I laughed. "You want me, the guy who charged you thousands of dollars for a water plant, to convince someone else to play nice with the HOA? I know it's weird, but you also negotiated fairly in the end. You could have destroyed us financially, but you didn't. This property owner is just being greedy. He wants 3 times what the land is worth, and he's threatening to build something disruptive if we don't pay. What's he threatening to build? A concert venue. Right next to our residential neighborhood." I thought about it. "Give me his number, I'll talk to him." The property owner's name was Dale Richards, and he was indeed being unreasonable. But after I shared my story, he understood the difference between standing up for your rights and simple extortion. He eventually sold the land to the HOA for a fair price, plus a reasonable premium for the inconvenience. Jennifer sent me a thank you basket with local Arizona wine and honey. The card read, "Thanks for being the reasonable one. Who would have thought? Who would have thought, indeed." As I sit on my porch now, almost 3 years after that construction crew first appeared on my property, I can see the water treatment facility in the distance. It's no longer an eyesore or a reminder of conflict. It's just a building doing its job, providing clean water to a community. The fence that marks my property line is still there, a clear boundary between my land and the HOA's. But these days, it feels less like a battle line and more like a simple property marker, the way it should have been from the beginning. I learned a lot through this experience. I learned that standing your ground matters, that documentation is everything, and that patience can be more profitable than immediate action. I learned that not all HOA board members are like Deborah Pemberton, and that sometimes reasonable people can resolve unreasonable situations. Most importantly, I learned that you don't have to accept it when someone tries to take advantage of you. You can fight back, and you can win, especially when you have the law on your side and the patience to see it through. The story of the HOA that built a water treatment plant on my land, and then had to pay me for the privilege, has become my favorite story to tell at parties. It usually starts with someone complaining about their own HOA, and I'll say, "Let me tell you about the time my HOA built a water plant on my property." People never believe it at first. Then I show them the photos, the court documents, the news articles. Their expressions always shift from skepticism to disbelief to admiration. You actually made them pay you for using your land. They'll ask, "Every single month for a year and a half," I'll confirm, "and then they paid me a lump sum to buy the land they should have bought in the first place." That's brilliant. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was just a man who was tired of being pushed around, who happened to have the resources and stubbornness to push back. Either way, it worked out better than I ever could have imagined. The money is nice, the principle is better. And the satisfaction of knowing that Deborah Pemberton can never serve on an HOA board again. That might be the best part of all. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it takes effort, money, and patience. But when it finally arrives, when the person or organization that wronged you has to face the consequences of their actions, it's worth every moment of struggle. I still have my 5 acres in Prescott. I still have my workshop and my woodworking hobby. I still have my peace and quiet, the things I wanted when I bought this property in the first place. But now I also have a story, a precedent, and $250,000 that I wouldn't have had if the HOA had just done their due diligence and stayed off my land. As I often tell people who ask for advice about their own HOA disputes, document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the value of patience. Sometimes the best revenge is simply making the other side pay for their mistakes, literally and figuratively. And if you're really lucky, you might even end up friends with the people who tried to wrong you, once they learn to respect property rights and basic decency. The water treatment plant still runs, the community thrives, and I sleep well at night knowing that I stood my ground and won. That's worth more than any amount of money, though the money certainly doesn't hurt. Justice, I've learned, is best served with documentation, patience, and a good lawyer. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, it comes with monthly checks and a final settlement that makes every moment of the fight worthwhile. The end.